This presentation is being recorded by Missoula Community Access Television as part of a media assistance grant donated to the library by MCAT. Right. Welcome everyone. It's nice to be back. My name is Kelly Moore. I'm with the Missoula County Extension Office in Montana State University Extension. So today we're going to be talking about apples. It's a nice, beautiful day outside. It's starting to look like fall, and so that always makes us think about apples. We get a lot of great local varieties of apples, and we're going to talk about a few of those today. So, and then we have a recipe, a very quick apple crostata, which is kind of a way to say a rustic apple pie, and I hope you'll enjoy today's segment. Okay. So let's start with some apple varieties. We've all heard probably the story about Johnny Appleseed. So apples have been around a long time. And actually the apples like what we know today were brought by the colonists in 1607. The only native apples to the United States are crab apples. So, and we can do a lot of things with crab apples as well. But apples as we know them today came about when someone brought the seeds. There are hundreds of different varieties, and usually we get the ones that are either local or the ones that ship well. Apples are stored sometimes for a long time, so you don't always know that the apples you're buying in the store have been picked recently from someplace. Washington State supplies the most apples that we get. So New York, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and California are next after that. Apples are actually very healthy. We have always heard an apple a day keeps the doctor away. So apples really are a great source of fiber, and that's the skin on the apple where a lot of the flavor is and a lot of the sweetness. That soluble fiber actually helps prevent cholesterol buildup in your system, and it helps build up the lining of the blood vessels and reduces the incidence of atherosclerosis. Sorry, that's a very hard word to say, and heart disease. So apples contain a lot of water. They're also pretty low in calories. Most apples are about 81 calories a piece. Okay? And they also have calcium, phosphorus, and folate. So they're very healthy. We always hear about how many apples, when a recipe calls for a certain amount of apples, many times it will say how many pounds of apples. So if you go in and do a little research, a pound of apples usually equals 4 small apples, which we have a couple of samples over there, 3 medium or 2 large. Okay. So I've collected a few different kinds of apples. When we're doing a recipe, I like to have some variety in flavor and texture. So I have some Honeycrisp. We do grow these around here. McIntosh, we also, in fact, I believe these are from the Bitterroot. All right. We also have some Rainier apples. Kind of helps to have those little labels on there. It makes it a little easier to remember. And we have a Pippin apple, which is not really native to this area, but these also have some really great flavor. All right. In fact, if you're really interested in apples, you can go on the website and the Washington Apple Growers Association. They used to give a nice little chart of the different varieties of apples and which ones are better for baking, freezing, salads or pie. So that's some interesting material. And also, they give you kind of a nice graphic, give you the picture of the apple, tells you what variety it is, and again, what it's best used for. So I encourage you to go on those sites and gather that information. Okay, so today I'm going to be using a cookbook, and I was just looking through the beautiful cookbooks here in the library kitchen, and I did see this book. The library copy looks much better than mine because I've used this book so many times it's falling apart. This is the Ina Garten recipe. Many people have recipes for this apple crostata. I happen to like hers really well. It's simple, it's easy to read, easy to prepare, and so that's what we're going to follow today. I know last class we talked about making up some recipes, which is good. You can be innovative, but when it comes to baking, it's a little bit more concise recipe that you need to follow. So that's what we're going to do today. I've already made a crostata, and you will get to see that in a few minutes. But we're going to start with the dough and with the apples. So I'll kind of show you how we're going to put this together. Okay. All right. I've already peeled 4 apples, and I believe I have one of pretty much each one that we talked about: a pippin, a McIntosh, a Rainier, and a Honeycrisp. And this recipe calls for ingredients to make two crostatas, which is nice because when you're making the dough and you have one left over, you can freeze this dough. I happened to make this last night, put it in the refrigerator. They have to be chilled for at least an hour. So I took this one out so I can show you step by step how the finished product gets put together. All right. There's butter in this recipe, and some people would prefer to use a different sort of fat in pastry, but the butter in this recipe makes it very tender and flaky. And again, I chose to follow this recipe, so I'm going to do what she asked us to do, so to get the best results. Okay, and then also I've made a topping for the apples. It really helps to have a food processor, so because you're going to use that pulse button to get everything blended up. If you don't have one, you could still make this without that, but for best results, you do need a food processor. Okay. All right. So today I brought my gloves. My hands are clean, but I just think it's kind of, these days, it's nice to be using some extra precautions. So, and you don't end up with pastry all over your hands either. Okay. So put these on. They say I did make the other crostata earlier in the day. So we'll just start with this one. Okay. I also like to use this kind of rolling pin. It doesn't have the handles on it. It lets you have a lot of space and a lot of leverage to roll out dough. I'm going to use a little bit of flour on our board. Let's see where the hole is here so I can pour it out. There we go. You don't need to use much because all that flour is going to get incorporated into the dough. And if you put too much, you're going to make it really tough. All right. So we've got this. It's a little bit soft. After it's been in the refrigerator for a while, it's a little bit tough to roll out. So you want to leave it at room temperature for about 20 minutes or so. Okay. Now we want to try to get as round of a shape as we can. So I'm going to roll one side. I'm just using my hands to roll back and forth so it's pretty even. There we go. I'll turn it around again. Okay. And we want it to be about 11 inches in diameter. So a lot of times I kind of eyeball things, but I want to make this one as concise as we can make it. So I always carry this with me so I can make sure. A ruler would work as well, but it has to be 11 inches, so tape measure works pretty well too. Okay, and that is 11 perfectly there. This side is going to be a little bit past 11, so what I'm going to do, oops, there. We can just kind of push it together a little bit more. If we make it too big, then the apples that are called for in the recipe won't cover the bottom as well. Okay, so here we go. Okay, we're just about 11 right there and 11 right there. That's perfect. All right. So I've also taken some parchment paper and just put it in a baking sheet. I'm going to transfer this to the parchment sheet right now because if I put the apples in there and then transfer it, it's going to tear. So then that's going to hurt our final product. Okay, so carefully, I'm going to lay it on there. All right. So now we're over here with our apples. This recipe calls for cutting your apples a little bit differently. I'm going to brush some flour off here. Okay. We're not going to slice these apples. We're going to cut them in chunks. This is side so you can see. Sometimes if the apples are just sliced in smaller slices, they bake down and get really flat. And you want this to be a little bit puffy. So keeping the apples in chunks makes them not, makes them have a little more texture to them too, the final product. So just about like that. That's about the size pieces we need. Okay. I already had some left over from this morning too. We always wonder about how many cups of apple are in what they call for in the recipe. Let's see where I put that right here. This recipe calls for 1.25 pounds. So 1 pound of apples, whole apples, usually is 3 cups of prepared apples. So we're going to need a little bit more than the 3 cups. Okay. All right. Sometimes people like to leave the skin on their apple, which you could do that if you would like. Sometimes the skins can be a little bit bitter, so that's the only consideration in maybe taking them off. Apples do turn brown pretty quickly, the oxidation, so that's why you'll often see lemon juice or orange juice, some kind of acid put on there to keep that from happening. All right. I'll just cut these apart here. That's why, I bet you wonder why we had an orange here when we're making something out of apples, but that's what it is. Okay. So I'm going to try to get all those seeds out as well. Okay. This is a good job for kids to get them involved in cooking too. Right. It's a little bit harder to cut with gloves on, that's for sure. Usually what I do before I consider a certain apple for recipe, I taste it first, because if it doesn't taste good when it's like that, it's not going to taste good in your recipe either. It's not going to get any better. It might be sweeter, but it won't have a better texture. You can certainly use apples too. They have spots on them. You just want to make sure you cut that out, even if it's a worm, as it turns out. You just make sure you get all those extra things taken out of there. Okay. Now, let's see how close we are to 3 cups. I think when I add these apples in as well, okay, maybe half of this one, and I think we'll be good to go. This recipe takes a lot less time because you're not having to roll out 2 pieces of dough to make an apple pie. And it's kind of a nice change. Okay. Get that one, and I think that will be plenty. Right. Okay. So now in most apple pie recipes too, you would be pouring this on the apples and tossing it around. This recipe doesn't call for that. It calls for putting the apples in the middle after we've put a little bit of orange peel. And we're going to use our zester like we did the last class. Okay, just about a teaspoon. This adds a little bit of flavor too for orange. You might be asking, well, why wouldn't you use a lemon peel? You can do that too. It would just be a little different flavor. So the orange blends nicely with this. So we'll just toss that around. Okay. This is a good time too to make sure that you've cut everything in about the same size shape, because if you have some big chunks, they might not get done as quickly as the others. It's going to look like you have way too many apples for this, but they do cook down, so just going to pile them up there. That up a little bit. Okay. Now, this is where we're going to kind of pour the butter and sugar. The recipe also calls for some superfine sugar. So this is called baker's sugar. It dissolves a lot better than the other kind of sugar. So that's what I'm using in this recipe. If you don't have it, it's not absolute, but it does make a better product. You use this also for like angel food cake and that sort of thing. Okay. All right. So this does have the butter blended in. It has a little cinnamon, a little allspice, that sort of thing. Okay, so now we're at the point we're going to kind of pull up the sides here and just kind of pleat the dough around. Don't worry if you got a little bit of a tear there, you can just patch it up. That's the nice thing about this recipe too. Okay. Oh, and it's going to look a little bit smaller because you want that crust to be pulled up a little bit here. Okay, so that makes it just look like a little bit of pocket of apples there. This is going to bake at 425 for about 20 minutes. So, and I usually kind of turn it around in the oven at least once so you get some even browning on it. And make sure that the bottom crust isn't setting too low in the oven because it could burn very easily. Okay. All right. So once we have that baked, you want to leave it sitting out for a little bit to cool. Put this over here. Okay. And then this is what the finished product looks like. So with that many apples in there, it actually does pack down a little bit. It's a softer kind of dough, so but because it has that much butter in there, it has a really great flavor. Sometimes I will just cut it in like a pie wedge, serve it with whipped cream or ice cream, and it's a great, great fall recipe. So I hope you will enjoy making that. You could put, I suppose you could try other fruits as well. Maybe pears would be a nice switch. So this crust, I think, will be a really good go-to for you. All right? Okay. Well, thank you for joining me again today, and I hope that you will enjoy making an apple crostata.